The bleachers were still buzzing with the kind of noise only a championship game can produce. Parents cheering, cleats scraping against the dugout floor, the smell of hot dogs, and cut grass hanging over the whole field. My son Grant stood at home plate with his teammates, all of them in their dusty white uniforms, waiting for the league director to hand out the season trophies. He was 10 years old and he had spent every Saturday morning since March practicing his swing in our backyard until the light gave out. When his name was called, Grant walked up to accept the trophy for Most Improved Player. A small gold plastic figure frozen mid-swing on a marble-look base. His whole face had lit up the way it does when a kid finally gets proof that the hard unglamorous work actually mattered. He turned and looked for me in the crowd, holding the trophy up like it was a championship ring. That's when my mother, Patricia, who had shown up 20 minutes late and parked herself in a folding chair near the fence, called out loud enough for half the bleachers to hear. "Oh, don't get too excited, sweetheart. That's just a participation prize. They give those out to everyone these days." Grant's arm dropped slightly. A few of the other parents glanced over. One of his teammates, a boy named Miles, actually laughed, not out of cruelty, just the reflexive laugh kids do when an adult says something with that particular tone of certainty. Grant's smile didn't fully disappear, but it changed into something smaller, something that had started apologizing for itself. I felt my whole body go still in that particular way it does right before you decide you're finished being quiet about something. If you think this is where I marched over and made a scene, you don't know me yet. What happened over the next 10 minutes was quieter than that, and it was going to cost my mother something she genuinely did not see coming. Welcome to Echoes of Her, where the quiet ones are never as powerless as people assume. This is the story of the day my mother called my son's Most Improved Player trophy a participation prize in front of his entire baseball team, not knowing that the very account she'd been depending on every single month since my father passed away was one I had complete discretionary control over. If you've ever watched someone diminish your child's achievement in public and had to decide in that split second whether to make peace or make a point, you already know exactly how that moment sits in your stomach. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications because you don't want to miss what my mother learns before this game day is over. To understand why I didn't raise my voice on that field, you have to go back 3 years to the week after my father died. My father, Walter, had spent 30 years as a mechanical engineer, careful with money in a way that occasionally frustrated my mother, who preferred spending first and worrying about it later. Before he passed, he sat down with an estate attorney and restructured their retirement accounts into something called a qualified income trust with a specific clause naming me, not my mother, as the sole trustee with discretionary authority over monthly distributions. He'd told me privately in the hospital that he loved my mother deeply, but knew her spending habits well enough to worry what would happen if she had unrestricted access to a lump sum that needed to last the rest of her life. "She'll be angry when she finds out it works this way," he told me, his voice thin but steady, "but you'll make sure she's taken care of. I trust you more than I trust the number in her checking account." I hadn't wanted the responsibility. I took it anyway because he asked me to and because deep down I understood exactly what he meant. My mother had never worked outside the home, had never managed a budget larger than groceries and gift shopping, and had a lifelong habit of treating money like it replenished itself whenever she needed it to. For 3 years, I had approved her monthly distributions without complaint, adjusted them upward when her property taxes increased, arranged for a special one-time withdrawal when her car needed replacing, and never once mentioned to her or to anyone else in the family that I was the reason her lifestyle had remained comfortable since my father's death. She believed the trust ran itself, some automatic arrangement set up by lawyers she'd never bothered to fully understand. She had no idea that every single distribution required a signature that was mine. I also happened to be the primary corporate sponsor of Grant's Little League division, something I'd arranged quietly 2 years earlier through my consulting firm. After watching the fields go 2 full seasons without proper lighting repairs and the equipment budget shrink every year, my company's name appeared in small print on the scoreboard sign near the third base fence. Nobody in my family had ever noticed it or asked why the new batting cages had appeared the same spring Grant joined the league. Back at the field, Grant was still holding his trophy, though the pride in his face had dimmed considerably. The league director, a kind older man named Coach Dennison, was already halfway through announcing the next award, but I could see Grant glancing down at the little gold figure like he was reconsidering whether it deserved a place on his shelf at all. I walked over to where my mother sat in her folding chair, my voice calmed when I reached her. "Mom, that trophy is for Most Improved Player. It's not a participation award. He earned that." "I'm just saying," Patricia said, waving a dismissive hand, the same gesture she'd used my entire childhood whenever she wanted to end a conversation without actually addressing it. "These leagues hand out so many trophies now that none of them mean anything. Back in my day, only the best kids got recognized. Everyone else just played." "He worked on his swing every single weekend for 4 months. I said, "Coach Dennis told me himself. He had the biggest improvement of anyone on the team." "Well, that's sweet, but let's not pretend it's the same as actually being good," she said loud enough that Grant, still standing near home plate, clearly heard every word. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I glanced down. A message from Renata, the league's fundraising coordinator. "Quick note before the ceremony wraps. Can you confirm you're still good to be recognized at next month's sponsor appreciation dinner? The board wants to thank you publicly for covering the lighting and equipment upgrades these past 2 seasons. Also wanted to flag that Patricia's monthly distribution request came through this morning. She's asking if this month's amount can be increased for a cruise deposit. Waiting on your sign-off." I looked up. My mother was still talking something now about how kids these days needed to learn what real achievement looked like. "Instead of being coddled with trophies for effort, Mom," I said, my tone even, "I want you to think about what you just said to your grandson in front of his whole team right after he worked incredibly hard for something. I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm being realistic. Someone has to be. Since we're talking about what's realistic," I said, "I got a message just now. It's actually relevant to something we should probably discuss." Grant had wandered a little closer, still holding his trophy, listening in the way kids do when they sense adult tension without fully understanding its source. "Renata from the league office," I said, "just confirmed the sponsor appreciation dinner next month. The one honoring whoever funded the new lighting and the batting cages the past 2 seasons. Patricia blinked. "What does that have to do with anything?" "That was me, Mom. My company funded both of those projects quietly. Because I didn't want it to be a whole thing. I just wanted Grant's team to have decent equipment and lights that actually worked for evening games." "You paid for the lights." Patricia's voice had lost some of its certainty. "I did. And since we're on the topic of what people earn versus what gets handed to them," I continued, "there's something else in that message. Your distribution request from this morning. The increase for the cruise deposit that came across my desk about 20 minutes ago." My mother's face went very still. "What are you talking about? That account runs on its own. The bank just sends the money. There is no bank sending money automatically. Mom, Dad set up a trust before he died. I've been the trustee for 3 years. Every single distribution you've received since his funeral has gone through my approval. The property tax adjustment, the new car, the kitchen renovation, all of it required my signature." "That's not possible," she said, her voice climbing slightly. "Your father would have told me." "He told me instead," I said, "because he knew exactly how you handle money when nobody's checking, and he trusted me to make sure it lasted." Coach Dennis, who had finished the awards ceremony, glanced over at us, clearly sensing something had shifted, and quietly ushered the rest of the team toward the snack table to give us space. "So, you've been controlling my money this whole time," Patricia said, her voice quieter now, the anger giving way to something closer to disbelief. "I've been managing it responsibly the way he asked me to. I've never once denied you anything reasonable. I increased your monthly amount without you even asking twice when I noticed your expenses had gone up. I've never made you beg for a single dollar. Then why does it feel like a punishment right now?" Because right now you just stood in front of a 10-year-old and told him his hard work didn't count, using the same dismissive tone you've used on me entire life whenever something I did wasn't flashy enough for you to be proud of. And it happens that the same week you're asking me to approve extra money for a cruise, you couldn't manage 5 minutes of basic kindness toward your own grandson. Grant had come to stand beside me now, still holding the trophy, watching his grandmother with a kind of quiet, careful attention children have when they're deciding how much of an adult conversation actually concerns them. "I didn't mean it like a punishment," Patricia said. "I just don't understand why everyone gets a trophy now." "He's not everyone, Mom. He's your grandson, and he earned that specific trophy for a specific reason. And I would like you to actually ask him about it instead of deciding it's meaningless before you even know what it's for." There was a long pause. My mother looked at Grant. Really looked at him, maybe for the first time all afternoon. "What did you improve on?" she asked, her voice quieter, almost reluctant. Grant hesitated, then held the trophy up slightly. "My batting average went from 180 to 340. Coach said that's the biggest jump on the whole team. I practiced every Saturday since March." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know that." "You didn't ask," I said, not unkindly, just honestly. "We didn't resolve everything on that field that day." My mother left the game quieter than she'd arrived. The cruise deposit conversation unfinished, the trust conversation clearly still settling in her mind. I approved her regular distribution that evening, the same amount as always, no increase, and sent a short note explaining that the cruise deposit could wait until we'd had a real conversation about budgeting and expectations going forward. She called me 3 days later, her voice smaller than I was used to hearing it. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the trophy, about the money, about all of it. And your father really set it up. So, you controlled everything?" "He did, because he loved you and he knew exactly what you needed protecting from, including yourself sometimes." She was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry about what I said to Grant. I've been thinking about it since the game. I called it a participation prize because that's easier than admitting I don't pay enough attention to notice when he's actually working hard at something. That's the first honest thing you've said about it." I told her the following weekend she came to Grant's next game, sat through all 6 innings without a single dismissive comment, and afterward asked him directly in front of his teammates this time to tell her about his batting stance and what he'd changed since the spring. Grant lit up, explaining it, walking her through his stance shift, his grip adjustment, the hours of tee work in our backyard. It wasn't a single dramatic apology that changed things between them. It was small moments stacked one after another. Patricia asking real questions instead of delivering quick verdicts, showing up on time, staying through the whole game instead of leaving early. She never mentioned the trust again, and I never brought up the cruise deposit either, though I did eventually approve it once she'd shown some real effort to understand what she'd almost cost herself. Grant kept that trophy on his shelf all season, right next to the new one he earned the following year for Team MVP. He never asked why his grandmother suddenly started paying closer attention to his games. He just accepted it the way kids do, simply grateful that someone who used to make him feel small had finally decided to make him feel seen instead. Some lessons cost people more than they expect. Others, if you're lucky, teach them exactly what they needed to learn before it's too late to matter. By the end of that summer, Patricia had become one of the more familiar faces in the bleachers, showing up early enough to grab a good seat along the third baseline, bringing a thermos of coffee she'd share with the other grandparents while the boys warmed up. Coach Dennis mentioned to me once, almost in passing, that she'd asked him detailed questions about the team's fundraising needs for the fall season, whether they still needed new batting helmets, whether the pitching machine needed replacing. I hadn't asked her to get involved. She simply started paying attention the way people do once they finally understand what they'd been missing. At the season-ending banquet that October, held in the community center gym with folding tables and a sheet cake shaped like a baseball diamond, Grant was called up again, this time for Team MVP. He walked to the front in his good shirt, a little taller than he'd been in the spring, and accepted the trophy from Coach Dennis with the easy confidence of a kid who no longer needed anyone's permission to feel proud of his own effort. I watched my mother from across the room. She wasn't scrolling through her phone or chatting with the other grandmothers about something unrelated. She was watching Grant with her hands folded in her lap. Her whole attention fixed on him, the same way I remembered her watching my father give speeches decades earlier, back before life had worn some of the softness out of her. When Grant sat back down at our table, trophy in hand, Patricia reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "I'm proud of you," she said simply, without qualification, without comparison to anyone else's achievement, without the word just anywhere near the sentence. Grant looked at her for a second like he was checking whether she meant it, then smiled, the same wide, unguarded smile he'd worn back in the spring before anyone had told him his hard work didn't matter. "Thanks, Grandma." Later that night, after we'd driven her home and I was tucking Grant into bed, he asked me quietly, "Is Grandma different now?" People can change. I told him if they're willing to actually look at themselves honestly. It doesn't happen all at once, and it doesn't erase what happened before, but yes, I think she's trying, and I think that trying counts for something. He nodded, satisfied with that answer in the straightforward way children usually are. And within a few minutes he was asleep, his new trophy sitting on the shelf beside the first one. 2 small gold figures frozen mid-swing. Proof of a season that had taught more than one person in our family something worth learning.